Alrighty, tighty. What is up, dudes? That's all my beautiful brawlers of the interwebs. Bloody Nugs here, aka the Goth Gamer, your Res Anime King, but more importantly, the king of the Fight Club. I hope you're all having an amazing evening, morning, afternoon, day, night, whatever time it is for you. I hope you're having a wonderful one, guys. Today, I have a very, very special video today here because this is a very special live stream as we are doing an exclusive live interview with two of the devs over at Malformation Games. I have today with me Nate and James. How you doing today, guys?
Hey,
I'm good.
doing good.
Thanks for having us.
No, thank y'all.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks for
you.
having us on.
It's so glad to have y'all here. Now, for those who don't know who Malformation Games is, you may have seen a lot of their posts on social media making their rounds. I was like, this is the team behind the upcoming retro-inspired survival horror game Ground Zero, a very Resident Evil, Silent Hill style horror game, but with a unique twist that it's actually very much heavily inspired by Korea and set within Korea. So, guys,
Yeah.
tell the team, tell the internet a little bit about the game here, or introduce yourselves first. I was like, James, why don't you kick it off?
Yeah, I'm too eager. So I'm James. I've been heading up the Ground Zero project since, well, I don't know when, was it 2022?
Yeah, early 2022.
I've been into horror for a really long time. First got Resident Evil when I was, I think, 6 years old, something like that. Saw it on the shelf, liked the box, had no idea what it was about. Loaded it up on my PlayStation, and I've never looked back since for survival horror. So it's been a dream for a long time to make a game like this, and thankfully I've got a really good team behind me, Nathan being one of them. It's not just me, Nathan, there's a whole group of us. But,
Yeah, thank you, by the way.
Yeah, no, thank you. And Nathan, tell them a little bit about your background, man.
Hey, so yeah, I'm Nate. I am the level designer on the project, and I have a very similar background as James, actually. I grew up playing, all the old classic A-list survival horror games, Resident Evil, Silent Hill. For me, I watched my dad play those games a lot as a kid, and then I was too scared to play them, but I finally worked up the courage at some point, and at the same time, I was also dabbling around with modding with games like Half-Life and stuff like that, and then I started getting an interest to wanting to make games, and that's kind of what got me started into this whole thing. And then I met James, and yeah, I mean the rest is history, honestly. But I've always been really fascinated with survival horror. I love being scared, and I'm just really happy that it's like a dream come true in a way for me, right? Like getting to work on a game like this, because I've always loved games like this as a kid. So
Yes, I was like, and I was like, kind of like y'all. I was like, for those who don't know my history with horror, is that for me, I grew up with a lot of the classic A-list horror games, but I was also still very young at the time. So I remember I was probably about 6 watching my older brother play Resident Evil 3 Nemesis for the first time.
yeah, man,
And
I love that game.
it's traumatizing when you're a 6-year-old kid and you watch Nemesis grab Brad by the face and just stick him with his tentacle right through and just get a giant hole in the face. I'm just like, well, that's terrifying. And you know what? Because of that, I was like, I've had this like intense love of horror games because I think that horror games themselves are very unique amongst horror fans because of the fact that since it's so immersive and you're more involved, I was like, it's easier to get scared than with movies. Like, don't get me wrong, a good movie can scare you, but games draw you in, and it makes it so much more intense because you're feeling it because you're interacting with it. And from games like Silent Hill, Resident Evil, the atmosphere and the intensity, and then you have classics like Project Zero or Fatal Frame for those who know those games. It's like those are some of the most standout games in that genre. So to see y'all have that same history of playing those classics and be like, I want to make something like that myself, and to see where y'all are now, it's wonderful news to hear. So my biggest thing first of all for y'all is what inspired y'all to want to make this game, but also specifically within Korea, because the fact that y'all really made a point is that it's a Korean style or inspired horror game in that genre. And right now with those retro horror games, that is seeing a very big renaissance right now, right? We're seeing a
Oh
lot
yeah.
of indie games really want to capture that nostalgic feel of old school Silent Hill, Resident Evil style horror. So because of y'all's history growing up with that, is that what made y'all want to really do that genre, but also have an appreciation for like Korean culture that y'all wanted to do something different? Or what kind of led into all that?
Yeah. So I think uh, my background is I've been working in the games industry professionally for a while, since 2011. And after I'd say about 8 years, I decided, hey, it actually kind of sucks making someone else's games and like not really doing what I want to do. So I broke away. I'm back in it now, but in a different capacity. And I was like, okay, I want to do this as a full-time job, but I don't want to do just what AAA is doing. I think AAA is a little bit stale at the moment. So for me, doing something that's like unique, or at the very least hasn't been done too much before, is quite important. And then that just got me thinking, like, okay, well, if we were going to do a survival horror, um, there's plenty of games like that, but what would be a way to stand out a little bit and showcase somewhere that really hasn't been seen? And I think for me, Korea is quite a natural choice. It's a beautiful country, beautiful language, unique architecture, has a really good history with horror. Some great Korean horror movies. If you haven't seen any, check them out. And yeah, it's
Train
just
to
a great
Busan.
fit, I think. Yeah, yeah, Train to Busan is for sure one of them. Yeah,
Yep.
fantastic movie.
Love
Yeah,
that
so
movie.
it's just all about really like wanting to do something that's kind of a little bit different, but familiar enough that it's kind of recapturing that nostalgia I have for Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Dino Crisis with a little twist on top.
Yes, I was like, and seeing a lot of the mutations and a lot of the monsters, you definitely see like that Dino Crisis kind of feel, right? I was like, but more in the hey, this isn't just genetically modified dinosaurs. It's like, no, these are crazy mutated monsters that look almost like dinosaurs. And I think that's one of those things that really kind of stuck out to me and just like caught my attention. I'm just like, dude, this is awesome. I was like, especially the first one that you showed, like that huge grotesque looking one that almost looked like a T-Rex but with no arms and stuff. I'm just like, what is this? I was just like, why is it so gross and why can I not look away?
Yeah, I mean, we could maybe, if you're up for it, we could maybe show some of those things kind of up close a little bit. Um, I think one of the things that kind of goes underappreciated, I think, with especially indie development, is like really kind of studying the art as an individual skill. Of course, you can praise the graphics of the game, right? You can say the atmosphere is fantastic, but I think like really appreciating just the individual amount of work that goes into a very specific thing, like in this case the dog monster you were talking about, or the T-Rex. I think that's important to me. So if you'd be up for it later on, we could actually go through and show some things like that.
Yes, I know I would personally love, and I'm pretty sure that some of the community here would absolutely love to see some of those behind the scenes and some of those the work on the models and everything else that kind of went into things here. So that is definitely something that I know that we would be very open to seeing more on, because like you said, is that art and especially what goes into a lot of the models for these individual creatures or even the characters, it doesn't always get enough attention. And especially when you do a lot of these old school retro inspired, or even if you look at some companies that do like pixel games, right? There's still a certain level of care that goes into getting the kind of feel and emotion that you want from something that's even pixelated. So I think being able to really kind
Yep.
of dig into that process and kind of look at what goes into those, especially when you're looking at something like this that where it is relatively large 3D models, to really kind of see the amount of effort and time that would take to create something like that, and then of course seeing the animations and work, it brings to mind a much different appreciation than just seeing it when you see the background and everything else in motion, right?
Mm.
So, I know you mentioned here, James, is that um, you wanted to do something different with retro, with a horror game. You didn't want to do everyone else's game here, and when you're looking at ideas and places, is that Korea stuck out to you? And I think that it's very interesting, because of the fact that you look at the fact that, especially within the last decade, Korea has definitely grown into a very big focal point in media. We've seen more movies and TV shows and dramas. We've seen music because of like K-pop boy bands and girl bands and stuff like that. Korea's definitely had this like massive growth to be a very good center point. And as you mentioned, they have a lot of history, a very unique culture that doesn't get a lot of attention. And I think that especially within the horror sphere and on the indie side, we've seen a lot of like smaller Asian countries that have gotten a lot of
Hmm.
that attention that have grown over the past decade. You look at Malaysian horror, we've seen Taiwanese, Thai, Indonesian, and to see that now Korea is definitely becoming such a big focal point of all centers of media. We've seen that they have their manhwa comics, right? Very much comparing to manga and even having anime and stuff like that. So to see that there's now a drive, especially from creators like yourselves, wanting to push gaming and really dig into that culture, I think it's a wonderful thing to see that inspiration coming stemming from y'all.
Yeah, I agree. I touched upon it a little bit earlier, but when I said I was kind of a little bit disillusioned with the games industry, one of the problems I had was like you'd see. I went back and forth between a couple of companies, and you'd see kind of the same people, like the same. Like if you work at company X, then you move to company Y, eventually you'll probably see them in a small industry, and I
Oh, looks like there was a little bit of lag there, guys.
think.
Yeah, I think you're lagging out a little bit there, James.
Yeah, it's all
I don't know
right.
if you can still hear us.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there we go.
I'm loading up the game in the background, so it's gonna
Okay.
that'll do it.
test my
Yeah,
PC.
that'll do it here.
Yeah, yeah. What I was saying was that yeah, I mean AAA is fine, but there's so many people, like you said, Malaysian, Indonesian. There's so many people with stories to tell out there, and you just don't really get that opportunity. But now that Unreal is free, Unity is free, Godot is free.
I think it's Godot.
It's so much more accessible to people, and like you now people can have Steam as a global platform.
Hmm.
So part of the thing with the Malformation is that we want people to join the company who are not part of this like revolving door of people from the AAA industry. So that's pretty important to us.
Yeah, and I'm glad to see that here because I do think that I've always said, and for those who follow me on all my socials and stuff like that, and seen me on other podcasts, I've always said that indie games are the backbone of the industry because every major title started out as an indie at some point. And you think about a lot of these genres that have come out, most of them have become genres because of indie games. You look at things like roguelites, deck builders, and a lot of those, you don't see a lot of major AAA titles pursuing those genres. Those stem from indie games, and then they get to the point where it's just like, hey, we should make that a thing. Look at roguelites now. It's like you have the success of games like Hades, Slay the Spire, and others that have pushed like a, hey, we can make a roguelite. That's why you get a game like Returnal for those who are PlayStation fans and love that kind of genre. That's where that kind of stems into. So I love the fact that y'all have been in the industry. Y'all have seen the big stuff, and now that y'all are doing y'all's own thing, y'all are helping to lend into that. Hey, there's so many more other inspirations and things that aren't being done that can be done, and just kind of
Yeah,
feeding back into that, being the foundation of new things to come in the future.
yeah, for sure. Yeah. Nathan, did you have any thoughts on that? I feel like I'm talking a lot here.
Oh no, you're fine. I've been enjoying just listening. I mean, I really have mostly the same things to say. I mean, we're just trying to. So going back to the original question, you're asking about like why Korea, right? Why that choice? And for me personally, um, I just wanted to when we talked about the game when we were first like thinking about starting this up, we really wanted to have a central focus of our development being making something unique, like unique, but also recognizable at the same time, right? Like so, you're playing an Resident Evil inspired game, but it somehow feels different at the same time, and that was we all just kind of like Asian culture already. We like Asian, like architecture and design and history and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And and then that on top of wanting to make something unique, just that's what kind of naturally led us toward picking this as a setting, right? And then we looked more into it and we're like, there's really nothing out there that's like this. So if we can pull it off, it'd be something really unique, and that would be really good for setting the game apart and making it more memorable. Um, And as far as the other stuff, I mean, yeah, I agree totally about like the indie stuff. I mean, um, I play a lot of Killing Floor. I don't know if you've ever heard of that game.
Oh, I
And that
love
game,
Killing Floor.
yeah, and that game was basically a mod at one point, right? And now it's turned into an entire. I mean, Tripwire Interactive is an entire, basically they're publishing games and everything now, and they're making Killing Floor 3. Like it's
Hmm.
everything kind of starts off at like a small level and it blows up, or like battle royale games, right? And we didn't really see that very often. And then we had PUBG, and I think even DayZ did a little bit of that, and now you even have that in like Call of Duty now, right? So somebody has to make that first move, and then it kind of kicks off like a chain reaction, and then it's explosive sometimes. And the same things even happen. You talk about there being a renaissance. I totally agree, because there was a little bit of like a dark age at a point with survival horror, kind of fell off the map. But then I think RE7 coming out back in, I don't even remember what year anymore,
Oh,
kind of like restarted that whole thing. And now we're like in the whole remake era, right? Where every game is like,
I
we got Resident
believe
Evil 4 and stuff like that.
I
So
believe RE7. I think that one came out in 2017. I remember because I was
yeah,
super excited for it, and I was like, anyone who knows me is like, I'm a sucker for like really like collector's editions and stuff. Like, I love physical
yeah,
items, and
for
I was
sure.
like, and when they revealed that collector's edition of the giant Baker house, where if it has the button where it'll actually play the song that they had, the Go Tell Aunt Rhody, I'm just like,
Oh,
Yeah,
I need that. I was like, I was just like, $300. I was like, yeah. I was like, I could do that.
yeah, for sure. And it all goes back to what I was saying, right? Where somebody just kind of has to make that first move. And back then, right, when that game was coming out, it was like, whoa, first person Resident Evil, like that's different, and then they went to make RE2, and now we obviously have way more games now. And yeah, like I said, it just kind of kicked off like I mean, I can't really say for sure whether that was what started that whole thing, with all these other games doing it, but that game was so successful, and then the Resident Evil 2 remake came out, and that was really successful. So anyway, that's what I'm trying to say basically is we're really fortunate in a sense, because there's like almost like not a better time than now to be doing something like this. Like survival horror is like back on the map now, so we're
Yeah,
just really
yeah.
stoked
yeah,
to be able to show you guys all this stuff, and hopefully having this coming out soon for you guys.
Yeah.
yeah. And
It's
I
like the
know that
perfect storm, right?
it is the perfect
Yeah,
storm.
exactly.
And I was telling James before we started the show here, is that you look at a lot of like indie games right now. I was like, for probably the most recent one is Crow Country that came out about 2 weeks ago.
Mm.
Very
Yeah.
PS1 inspired survival horror, has the same aesthetic that you would expect from those old PS1 kind of games here. But you're seeing more and more really want to capture that nostalgia, that wants to capture that feel, but still feel original. And I think that's what
Yep.
is so amazing about what y'all are doing, because when you're able to like dig into that nostalgic feel, but not rely solely on that, right? Be able to tell a well done story, have your own mechanics that make you stand out, have your own art style that stands out. I think that's what's being so well done with this renaissance for that old retro style survival horror. And I love what y'all are doing here. Like you said, y'all are doing something that's unique, that's standing out in a culture, in a country that doesn't have anything in this genre or in this appeal just yet. So I love seeing that. It's the perfect time. It's like you said, the perfect storm. Everything
Yeah.
that blows up has to have like a certain set of variables. It's like it's the timing, it's the culture, it's the interest. All of that culminated to the right timing for y'all to have this project come out as y'all do.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
felt,
absolutely.
at least for me, like it's felt like everything just kind of fell into place really neatly. Like I said, I moved away from my job for a little bit, and then I was kind of not adrift, but like I worked on a couple of projects that didn't really go anywhere. And then, once I met Nathan and we started prototyping this, it just suddenly felt like everything just fell into place. Like I said, perfect storm. And then games like Crow Country came out, and all the other survival horrors that come out. Like, it's just elevating and elevating and elevating. The only problem is there's so many good games coming out that it's like bad in a way, because if our game's even mid, which is fine, like it comes out, it's a 6 out of 10 game, right? We're just gonna get crushed by all these amazing indies that are coming out. So if everyone could just do a little bit worse job at games, that'd be fantastic.
It's like,
We just
guys, I
shine
was
a
like,
bit
y'all
more
are doing
for
great. I just need y'all to do like a 7 so that way our 8 can stand out.
Exactly. Exactly.
And you know what? That's true. I was like, but I also think that it's great to see everyone kind of succeed, and even as I say, you always carve out your niche here. You carve out what you're doing for. I think that there's always a way for games in the same genre to all kind of succeed and grow, and even if they're all the same genre, right? Because everyone's going to do something a little bit different, and I think that's the beauty about horror stuff, especially, is that we're already such a very niche genre as it is that each horror game is so vastly different. Even if 10 games come out and they're all first person horror games, cool, but each one's going to do something a little bit different. You, like you mentioned, you have Resident Evil 7, with Biohazard, first person kind of shooter survivalist, and then you have a game like Visage, first person horror, but it's more interactive based on the story and puzzles and the environment, right? So everything kind of can stand out on its own, and I love that, because there's always room for everyone to grow and kind of fit in that feel. And
Sure, yeah,
go ahead.
no, I was just gonna make a dumb joke.
Go ahead. I was like, I love dumb jokes.
Hey, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. I gotta tell it later. Because now if you set it up, people can expect too much. So.
Oh, that's true. I would say it's always about keeping about that level expectations, right? It's like, don't be like some people that overpromise the world and can't even deliver like the basics. I was like, that is absolutely fair. I was like, for anyone who you being in the industry, and especially on the AAA side, we saw that happen a lot with Lionhead Studios and Xbox, and Peter Molyneux back in the day. He was always promising the world and couldn't deliver half of the things he wanted to talk about. So, a little history lesson is just like, don't get too involved.
Yeah, the trick is to just say, this is the worst game I've ever made. It sucks, it's terrible, and then people expect nothing. So even if the game's a 3 out of 10, they're expecting a 1 out of 10. So it's miles better, 3 times as good as they thought it would be.
That's the secret. Set the bar low.
Exactly. I was like, you gotta lower the bar, not raise it. I was like, if you give them low expectations, if you can surpass that, then you're good.
Yeah.
I know we talked to James here a bit. I was gonna say, Nate, I was like, I know that you are the level designer, right? You're the lead level designer here. And for those who don't follow you guys on social medias and stuff like that, there was a post that y'all had shown off a couple months back, showing just the scale of like the first chapter of the game. And when I saw that post, it was massive on how many sections and small parts were all tied to that. You had like 4 major buildings that you had to cut through, and then like 7 like small connecting areas. And when I saw that, and I'm just like, this is just the first chapter. How do you get to a scale like that for a single portion of the game? Especially if you have, chapters, acts, however you want to classify it. Even if you have more than just 1, like even 2, to have something that large.
Sorry about that.
No, I'll say it's like, how do you how do you get to that point? How does that all grow out the way that it does?
So honestly, like a lot of it was almost like accidental in a way, which sounds kind of funny to say, because the way it happened, right? When we first, we decided we wanted to have the game in Korea, and then the first thing we did naturally is start trying to find places where we wanted to use as a reference point, and we settled on I don't know who like decided to do the area that we chose. It might have been me or James, but we ended up settling on Gamshin Culture Village, which is actually a really popular tourist destination in Busan. If anyone wants to look it up, that's watching, feel free. It's a very colorful, really beautiful, like mountainous village area, and it's really awesome. Like so much colors, and like that immediately stood out as like, wow, we need to have that. That's really sick looking. So we decided on that, right? And then we started trying to figure out like, okay, well, how would the general landscape around it be? And we decided on like the overarching landmarks of like having a lighthouse in the background, which you might have seen in some of the promotional material that we put out on Twitter and stuff like that. And that was like how we first started off, right? Basically figuring out like the like macro level stuff, if you will. And then we needed to go through and actually fill it out internally, like each individual small area. And like I said before we went on the air, we did a lot of this in isolation. So we worked on, the beach area first, and then we worked on the actual village area, and then we worked on the police station, and we working on the hospital. And the reason I said it was a little bit accidental is because when you're working on in isolation like that, it's kind of hard to really keep track of what's going on in the other levels. Like, we're only focusing on one section at a time, and we try to get that to feel good playing, good amount of puzzles, good variation, the combat is good, and so on. But then when you put them all together, we realized, like, wow, there's actually a lot of stuff. And there was a point in time where, we were just trying to see, like, how long would it take us to play through everything that we've made so far. And when we did that, we were really surprised to see that it actually took, like, over an hour. Just, like, knowing, like, we're making the game, so we obviously know what to do, right? We know the puzzles and everything. And even with that, it still was taking over an hour to get to the end of what we had made. And that was, like, a really pleasant, unexpected surprise. But yeah, so I would say, like, part of it was the initial planning, and then the rest of it was just kind of like, we're just trying to crank as much out of each area as we can.
No, and you know what? I think that's interesting because, like you said, is that when you're working on so many areas, when you're doing and they're all focused and self-centered, right? Like you said, isolation.
Yeah.
That's where it really comes into the fact of that you really kind of focus on the depth and the length of that individual area. So when you look at
Yeah,
a game,
exactly.
like you were saying, you have the hospital, you have the beach, and then uh, the police station. And when you really look at it, that's what makes those games really kind of stand out, because you mentioned how that they all kind of connect with those small sections in between them. And that's what you look at games like Resident Evil, where it really stands out, is that you have these small sections within the city, like Resident Evil 2, right? Let's
Yeah.
specifically look at that one. You have the small areas outside of the Raccoon City Police Department. Then you have the focus on the majority within the PD, and then outside of that, you go back outside the station. Then you have the whole sewers and that whole connecting area, and then you come out of that, and then it all goes into the underground, nest and all that kind of stuff here. So when you focus
Yeah.
on those big areas, you really start to see the sense of scale when each one is so dense, and when you
Exactly.
combine them all together, and you're like, oh, yeah, there was probably a lot more that we focused on each individual area, and then you have these, like, I'm not gonna say small areas, but you have the, like, interconnections in between those main areas. It really kind of shows how much work really went into it, and that level of depth that really plays into it.
Yeah, and that's actually something that I've learned. Like, we've all learned a lot while working on this project so far, and I mean, I've learned a lot about that in particular. Where you when I have an idea for something, we're prototyping it out, we're writing it out, we're making flow charts, whatever we got to do to actually get it going. And at the time when we're in the planning phases, it always seems like there's less than there really is. Like, that kind of feels like it might be a little short. You only have to do this one thing and then it's over already. It's like, yeah, but then when you start thinking about, like, well, but players are going to be looking around the environment, they may not even know where to go, right? So it ends up drawing it out a lot more than you realize, and that's something that I've learned really quickly while working on this project is even like small sections, like the boat that you're showing right now. That was actually one example of something where I think I even might have even said to James at once, like, I hope that's not too short, but it ended up being perfect, right? It ended up feeling really good after everything was in. So yeah, it's been a really fun and interesting process working on these. And yeah, just going back to your original, you were talking about the post you made with all the stuff, like, that's actually, I think, if I'm not, you can correct me here, James, if I'm wrong, but I believe that's actually up until chapter 4, I think, right? The gift that you posted with the fly through.
Yeah, so that's a bit of an older one. I think that was possibly, yeah, up until chapter 4. So we actually reorganized the chapters a little bit after
Yeah.
I posted that GIF. And I'd say it represents probably about, I don't want to overpromise, but like 5 hours, I think. Like, that includes the hospital and the police station, which I don't even think the hospital existed back then.
No, I didn't.
So yeah, it's more chapters now, but like more content at the same time. So as much as I'd love to say, oh, this is just one chapter, it's now multiple chapters, but it is bigger.
And you know what? That's perfectly fine. I think being able to break that all up here and really let each area kind of focus and stand out on its own is honestly a better thing. You don't want to put too much, because we've seen, especially looking at the AAA landscape of things, right, is that we've seen that when you put in too much content, that sometimes it overstays its welcome or it feels bloated and it can be more of a
Yeah,
drag. So putting all that into
for
a
sure.
single chapter, it it sounds nice, but at some point it's just like, okay, well, where's everything moving on? Where's the next drive here? So being able to get through those small areas and be like, okay, this was a chapter in and of itself. Cool. You feel like you're making progress and it feels like
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
not
Yep.
too drawn out. And sometimes that could be a little bit of a psychological thing here on the gamer's mindset, but that does play into a sense of their feeling of completion. It does play into that sense of, hey, I feel like I'm getting stuff done, even if it's just like, hey, that same 3 hours that would have been a single chapter, well, now it's three chapters. So instead of having to do 3 hours in
Yeah.
one go to just get one completion, well, guess what? Now you have three chapters completed, and you feel even better because you're like, yeah, 3 hours, I got all this done. Compared to if it was one, it was just like, 3 hours and this is all that I've done. Jeez. And
That's
Yeah,
exactly
exactly.
it.
and you
Yeah,
know what?
and
That
we were
that's
kind
great.
of feeling that. Yeah, we were kind of feeling that. Like, we felt that, like, so we built all the content, but I feel like I was letting the side down a little bit by the narrative. Like, you didn't back then. It felt like Sion, the character, she hadn't really accomplished a huge amount narratively in that time frame. And you hit the nail on the head when you say that, like, if you split it up chapter wise and we shuffle a little bit of the objectives around as well, introduce some characters, early points, things like that. It just feels psychologically better. Like, you're doing the same amount of stuff, but the game's giving that little dopamine hit of you've done a chapter, you've done a chapter. So you feel like you're making progress, even though it really is just cosmetic, right? Just it says chapter complete, but it doesn't mean anything. It's all about like satisfaction psychologically. So
Exactly, and I think that that's one of the things that really does play a part in video game design, right? Is that even if it's the same stuff, just having that little bit of a breakup goes a long way with one feeling satisfaction for the gamers, as well as making it feel like the amount of investment that they're doing, the time investment, is being rewarded. Because no one wants.
Yeah.
We know nowadays, especially on the AAA landscape, is that sales can mean so much. It means more on the indie side of things, but the biggest thing here is the time investment that someone's willing to put in. I was like, if they don't feel like their time's being rewarded, they're gonna drop something because of the fact that they don't feel like it's worth it.
yeah,
And in
Hmm.
this case here, you want to make sure that the time that they're putting into it, because there's a lot that's going into this, is that it feels good for them. I was like, especially when you look at horror, you have to feel like the time that you're putting in is really well done, and that the amount of time for however, right, you look at a chapter, it's just like, is that chapter, that 1.5 hours for the single chapter, is it intense? Is it fun? Is it enjoyable compared to doing the same part, but it's a part of something major? And does it feel like it's starting to drag out too much?
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and this isn't any shade to Baldur's Gate, but I'm playing Baldur's Gate 3 at the moment. I'm completely addicted, and it's like one of the best games I've ever played. Not a horror game, but still one of the best games I've ever
Oh,
played.
it's
And
amazing.
I'm at It is, yeah. I'm not going to spoil anything, but I'm on Act 3 now, and I'm feeling like the story slowed down a little bit, and I'm like a little bit disappointed in because it has had that effect of like I don't feel like my time has been fully respected and rewarded as a player now, and I feel like I'm kind of dragging. So that's what we wanted to avoid when we split up. Like just to go
Yeah.
back to the earlier topic of splitting up from one chapter, we wanted to avoid that feeling of like, oh, my time as a player is not being respected. So yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that's a good point here is like you said, I love the absolute hell out of Baldur's Gate. And like you said, the story, all the like side stories and everything else that you do in like chapter act 1 and act 2, all of that feels like you're getting all those little bits that are all coming together, and it feels, oh, great. I love it. I was like, and act 3 slows down a lot because that's the culmination of everything that you've done in the past two acts. But there's so much more extrapolation because of the fact that there's so
Yeah.
much more story that has to be fleshed out to close everything off, that it feels slower compared to the beginning. And I completely understand that that's what you're trying to avoid.
For sure, yeah. Because there's inspiration for us everywhere. I think you'd agree with this too, Nathan. Right? Like we're not just limiting ourselves to horror, even though there's so many obvious horror influences, right? There's obvious Resident Evil, obvious Silent Hill, obvious Dino Crisis. But like, I think just playing games in general is really important, because I actually fell off games for a while. Like, I just was kind of sick of them. I didn't play them for a long time, and now that I'm playing things like Baldur's Gate and even please don't judge me for this. This is shameful to admit, but I'm playing Fortnite as well. Um,
Listen, everyone has
like,
their
I'm
guilty
getting a lot of-
pleasure.
yeah, I know. But yeah, like even Fortnite, like it's given me some really good inspiration for like game feel, and kind of that game is like super tight mechanically. So yeah, and I think you're the same, right, Nathan?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've always believed that. I think, like, for example, for musicians, right? Like, it's important to keep constantly, practicing and playing, even when you're not, if you're like in a band or something, you're not. You're also just playing on your own free time, constantly keeping that drive going. And with a game developer, it's the same thing. Like, either tinkering around with mods or just playing video games. Like, it's really important to not constantly be doing it, but to do it, because that's what kind of drives our motivation and our inspiration. We play a game and we see something like, wow, that's kind of cool. We should put something like that in our game, and that's how a lot of those things actually come out. Or again, going back to the music example, you hear something in another song and you're like, wow, that's really cool. I like how they did that, with whatever instrument, and then it inspires you to push forward. Like, art basically inspires other art. That's always how it's been in like almost every medium possible. So constantly playing games and just kind of checking out what other people are doing is a great way to get inspiration and ideas.
For sure.
Yeah, and you know what? I think that is a big point. Is that being able to enjoy other games and play as a dev, it does give you a lot of inspiration. There was a team
Yeah.
that I talked to a while back that has an indie game coming out. For those who know, it's called Deathbound. It's a Souls like game, but they wanted to do something different. Instead of having a single character, being able
Mhm.
to be flexible across whatever playstyle you want. They made a party based. Is that each character has a very specific playstyle that and a very specific type of genre or class that they play, and you can switch your characters up and change your party based on these four characters, and you use them throughout combat. And I was just like, you know what? That is
Interesting.
very so different, because you think that most Souls like have one character that you play. You can change them up however you want to do to fit your playstyle. But in here, they're like, no, we're gonna have characters with set personalities, set history, set story, and a very specific playstyle, and you can switch through them on the fly while you're in combat. And I'm just like, that's so different. And when I talked to the team behind that, the main devs who did a lot of the design spent years playing Dark Souls games. They're like, we want to know everything about this genre. We want to know the ins and outs to make it just the way we want. We don't want to understand all these systems. And I think that's the beauty of being an indie dev who also is able to enjoy and play games in other genres, or even if it's in the same genres. Like, what works for that game that works for you. It's just like, oh,
Yeah.
this is great. Let's use that for ourselves and let's change it to fit what we want. And I think that's one of the beauties about being on the indie scene about what y'all do.
For sure. Yeah, and one other thing I'd like to add to that as well, and onto what you said, and also what I was saying earlier about it being a good source of inspiration. I think probably the most important reason why almost any developer, in my opinion, especially level designers, like I can only really speak for level designers here to be fair, because I'm not an animator, I don't make music and that kind of stuff, but I'm sure it's very similar for those things as well. But one of the most important reasons for playing games is so that you can understand from a player's perspective how the game design actually plays out, right? Because we might have an idea about something and we do it, but it might be really awful at execution. And you get a lot of intuition being a player yourself, right? You learn about, like, I didn't really like how that level in whatever game did this, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna try to not do that in my game, or whatever. And it's not meant to be disrespectful to anything, of course. Like, it's different context, right? There's level design in particular is very, very contextual, where if you're doing multiplayer versus single player, it changes entirely how you design the maps, right? And then the game itself, right? The mechanics of the game uh, change how you make maps very drastically. So I know for me in particular, playing other games is super duper important to me, so I can get a better intuition as a player of how people are going to, possibly. Obviously, I can't know for sure, but possibly experience the maps, if that makes sense, in Ground Zero.
Of course,
Yeah.
and you know, having that background, right? You done level design work. You when you play a game,
Mhm.
you have that mindset of, hey, this is how I would envision it. And when you're seeing another game, right? You're playing another game, you get that enjoyment of the atmosphere, the way that the level design works, what doesn't work, and you're like, oh, I would change this. It gives you an appreciation because you can see where they get their inspiration, what you think works and
Exactly.
why it does, but also you're just like, I don't think that would necessarily work for what I would have done. And I think that that's what helps to kind of drive that innovation is that we can be
Yeah.
both we can be, you know, admiration and be absolutely excited for something here because we have that experience, but at the same time we could be critical in the aspect of it's just like, if this was me or this was my game, I would have done it this way, and then that drives you to want to change how things would work when you do it yourself.
Yeah, and that's really like the beauty of art, right? Is like everybody has their own interpretation. Like both the creators of art and the people who experience art, right? The people who consume it. Like everybody has their own unique perspective, and that's actually the beauty of the entire thing, really. And you know, also the thing about games as well is like the games industry has always been kind of, I don't want to say dominated, but trends have always been like a major factor, right? So another thing that kind of factors into everything that I've said so far. I feel like I'm really expanding your question, by the way, but another thing that kind of factors into that is also, you know, like what's hot right now, right? Like what are people really vibing with right now in horror games in particular, in our context, right? But I think the same would apply to basically anything, and that's kind of why in a lot of like the modern like AAA games, you see a lot of the same things, like, you know, everything has like a BR now, right? Like a battle royale mode or something. And that's kind of what I'm saying with like the trends, you know. So
Yeah.
it's an ever changing, like ever evolving process that you constantly have to keep, uh, you know, you have to keep in mind, not to keep on top of, but like keep kind of in the back of your head. And again, the best way to do that is to literally play video games. So
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely. And that's a very big point is that, you know, there's always been trends. There's always been someone makes something that's successive that everyone wants to follow. Be like, oh, we need our own version. Look at games like Gears of War. Gears of War was a very
oh
big
yeah,
transition for cover shooters, right? Then
oh yeah,
when they did Gears of War 2, right? They introduced the Horde mode back in 2008, 2009 when the game launched, right? And that blew up so much. Every game that came out within those years afterwards wanted to make their own horde mode. They wanted to make their own survival mode. They're like, we need to match what they're doing here. But
mhm,
not many games were able to capture the same kind of feel. But when each new iteration of Gears came out, they took what they had already started and they were able to add on to it. They kept reinvigorating and changing their own formula. So each horde mode, they're just like, yeah, here's horde mode 1.0. Here's our 2.0. Here's our 3.0 when the next game came out. Then they introduced a whole new mode that came out. They're like, hey, we're doing this escape mode. And they were able to keep rejuvenating their own design while others were trying to just like, how do we copy that? They're just like, why is this successful? How can we make it original, right? And I think that's
yep,
what is so big
exactly,
on how you properly follow trends. Because you look at, like you mentioned, the battle
exactly.
royale right now, because that's probably the biggest thing. You mentioned, you know, there was Daisy, and then of course PUBG, right?
PUBG, yeah,
And then you know who was the first one to jump on it right after that was Fortnite. But Fortnite was just like, how can we make this unique in our style? They took the fact that, hey, the base game, which was the survival building tower defense stuff, they're like, what if we introduce the building into this BR style? And then that blew it up because it became not only just a how do you survive and fight, but you also have to have this building aspect that played into it. And I think that's where it
yeah,
comes down to. It's like, how do you take what's already established and make it unique? And I think that's what y'all are doing so wonderfully well with the game is that y'all
thanks,
seen
man.
what other companies have done. You know what works for them, and you're like, hey, let's see what works for us.
Yeah, and one more thing I wanted to say, I just wanted to also add to that, that you know, it's going back to what I said earlier about how somebody kind of has to take that first step, you know, somebody has to just go put themselves out there and try something new. And you know, you talk about Gears of War, right? That's a great example for, obviously, that you know, I don't have like an extensive catalog of what cover shooters were out at the time, but I'm sure there was probably some other game that was experimenting with that. But they just happened to find that right, you know, perfect middle ground where it really hit off, and then it exploded. And I mean, that, like, you're still seeing cover mechanics in games even today, right? And that's kind of, I think I think James would probably agree with me on this, but like, we want to do things like Korea and try to pick something that's a little bit different because the hope I think in the future is that maybe uh, somebody else wants to make a game and they're inspired by our game. I think we'd all be really happy if something like that were to happen. Like, hey, like
Yeah,
I
for
saw
sure.
Ground Zero did this and that's really cool. I want to do that, and that's the beauty of the art form, man. That's kind of what I was saying earlier. It's all just kind of like a endless loop. Like games inspired more games, which inspired more games, and so on. So anyway, I feel like I'm rambling a lot about that, but I'm really passionate about it. So
No, and that's what I love is like that's why me as a content creator here and as a gamer being able to have these opportunities to talk with you guys is that I share the same passion that y'all have, but hearing y'all get excited about your own project and the all the beauty of the passion that goes behind the scenes on that project, I think is what always gets you excited because of the fact that knowing
absolutely,
how much love you have for the project and everything that you want to put into is always fun to experience and be able to share and talk with.
yeah, for sure. I mean, dude, I feel so like blessed to be here. Like I'm really just very thankful that I have the opportunities that I have. Thanks to James here. Like I said, this is like a dream come true for me. Like I love games like this. I've always loved games like this ever since I was a kid. I'm 31 now, and I've been playing games like this since I was like 9 or 10. Probably way too young for gruesome horror games where characters are getting blown to bits. But I was lucky that I had parents that didn't really mind that as long as they, my dad was always like, oh, as long as it's not real, it's like, yeah, and I was always like okay with it, and
Oh yeah, it's
now
like
like all this time later, actually being able to do it, I feel super fortunate to be here, and I'm really excited about it.
oh, I completely agree. I was like being able to have these opportunities. I was like, growing up, especially for us, it's just like, oh, playing too many games could be bad for you and stuff like that. Or like my
Yeah,
family would always tease me. What's playing games gonna do for you? And I'm just like, you know what? I was like, hey, it's allowing me to go to events and talk to these people. It's like it may not be paying my bills, but guess what? I was like, I get to have more experiences than y'all do. So you know what? It don't matter. I was like, it's doing something.
There you go. Yeah.
you're doing something you love, right? That's really all that really
Exactly.
matters, man. In
and
the end of
and
the day, you know what
that's
I
what it
mean?
is that I get to share my passion, my hobby, and my enjoyment and entertain
Yeah,
all the people who are watching and also get the chance to sit down and talk with amazing teams like y'all.
for
Yeah,
sure.
and I do want to say, like, Nathan said, it's a dream come true working here, but like, I want to extend my appreciation to him, not just him, the rest of the team, because it hasn't been easy this whole time. Like, sure, we are passionate about making the game, and it is fun 90%, 80% of the time working on the game, but for us, it's been a little bit tricky with trying to find a publisher. We've had a lot of negative experiences with that, trying to get funding, that kind of stuff. And Nathan and the rest of the team has stuck through me this whole time. So I am incredibly lucky. Nathan said he's lucky to be here, but it's actually the other way around. I'm lucky to have him. So the fact that he stuck around through this, yeah, that means a lot to me. Not that I'm paying him in
He's like, not that I'm paying him to say this or anything.
yeah.
I
Well,
mean, but that's the harsh reality though, right? It is really hard to make a game. Like it really is. Like there's such a high turnaround, or long turnaround, I suppose I should say. Like to getting a game from like the concept stage to actually being done, so much goes into it, and there's so many games out there that we never hear about that just don't come out because they either get canceled or they get scrapped or something. Because there's
yeah,
so much that goes into it, and I think a lot of times people don't realize that, right? That the games that you play, like sometimes bugs come out with them, and it's not like developers are doing that on purpose. Like there actually is so
No.
much stuff to do, and for indie, how many people are on the team, James? It's like five of us, right? Like
Yeah.
it's a lot of stuff to do for five people, and that's why he says like the 80%, 90%. There have been some tough times throughout this journey, like for all of us, and
mm-hmm.
sometimes struggling with motivation even as well at times. Like it's been a challenge, but we've always stuck through it, and we find ways to motivate each other. We show each other what we're doing at like our meetings. Like, oh, check this out, I did this, and we're like, dang, that's really cool. Like that kind of makes me want to go do this, and that's how we kind of get each other through that. We keep inspiring each other and trying to be supportive. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that's what it is that having that foundation and that trust and that bond on a team really does go a long way. Especially like you said, on an indie team, y'all are small. And it's just like this is
Very small.
this is a 5-person project. Y'all are the pillars that hold each other up. And so it's just like
Yeah,
when one person feels it, the team feels it because of the fact that
everybody.
exactly.
Yep.
It's different if it's like a team of 800, one or two people are feeling it. Everyone else is just going to keep on trucking. It's not that they don't care, it's just the fact that it's a large machine. But on a
Yeah.
small team like this, one person out of 5, that's 20% of your entire team. Y'all are going to feel it compared
Yeah.
to, 0.25% when a single person, can't do it or anything like that. So to see how much excitement y'all have and love and support, I was like, and I'm glad to see that here and see the team doing everything that they do.
For
Now,
sure.
Yeah.
before we get out of here, guys, I was like, because we were gonna be sitting here talking with y'all for an hour. If y'all have any questions, please post them in the chat. I was like, we'll be sure to ask them. But I know here, for you, Nate, that you were saying that had a little bit of some behind the scenes footage here or
Yeah.
some models to show off for the chat. So let's go ahead and take a look at that for y'all guys.
Yeah. Let me quickly let me get that open real quick.
Also, apparently, Nate, they said that I see Elmo said that if they get lost, they're 100% blaming you, and that they're gonna blame the level designer.
It's okay. I'll blame me as well. That's one of my buddies. He's yeah, he would do that.
Okay,
Love you too, Alma.
and what he's while he's pulling that up, I have a question here. They said, "Is there a feature or part of the game that you guys are most excited
Hmm.
for or proud of?"
You want to go first in that, James?
Sure. Yeah, I think for me, I really like the genome point system. So just quickly for those who don't know how it works, it's based on like the quality of the dead body once you kill a monster. So you scan the body with the little wrist gadget, and you extract as much DNA information as you can about it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, if you like blast it with a rocket launcher and blow it to bits, that means the DNA is going to be destroyed. Right. So you get less points. If you just use like a tiny knife to stab it to death, the body's going to be much more intact. So it actually, the game, typically in horror games, you get like a linear progression, right? You get the pistol, then you get the shotgun, then you get maybe, I don't know, grenade
Submachine
launcher,
gun, sniper
and you
rifle,
have,
whatever.
yeah, and you're just like, okay, I have a better gun, therefore I use the better gun. But I wanted to give players a way to like go back to their worst weapons. So you're rewarded with way more genome points if you use a worse weapon, and then you can use little stations every now and then to purchase upgrades like extra ammo, extra new guns, sights, all kinds of modifications. So I'm
So
quite proud with that.
and kind of adding on to that, do you still have where they're like in a lot of games like Resident Evil, how you have the normal gun, right? You have just the pistol, right? But later on, you find like the laser sight for it or an extended magazine for it that you can add on. Are there still upgrades that you find in the world that you can still add on, but the genome points gives you a little bit extra stuff?
For sure, yeah. So you
Yeah.
can find weapon upgrades, but the genome points that like you can. The intent is you could play the game without a single genome point, right? And you can still get decent weapons, traditional progression. You scavenge and you find like a scope or a silencer or a laser sight, whatever. But if you want the genome point system, then you can do it. So it's like complementary rather than mandatory.
And you know what? I like that. I was like, I like to being able to be like, hey, here's an additional way for you to upgrade your weapons if you want to take this and make it as OP as possible, right? It kind of reminds me a little bit of Resident Evil 4, right? Because Resident Evil has done so many things, it's easy to pull inspiration from them.
Yeah,
You look
yeah,
at Resident Evil
Yeah.
4, right? With Leon and everything else, how you find the money from killing enemies and stuff like that, and you can use those to buy the upgrades from the merchant to upgrade like your firepower, your reload
Yeah.
speed, or your magazine size, all that kind of stuff. But there are still the normal upgrades that you can find, like the sights or the laser or or other types of things that you can find on them. And that's kind of what you're doing here with the genome system. There's a points if you want to challenge yourself to try and get as much as you can to upgrade your weapons, or you can just use what you find out in the world.
yeah, for sure, exactly.
All
Yeah,
right.
it gives an incentive to like Big James said, it gives an incentive to use weaker weapons. And I've always personally been a really big fan of like watching like challenge runs that people do for Resident Evil games, like oh knife only, or something like that. And what's really cool about the genome system is it would directly reward stuff like that, right? If you were able to actually learn how the enemies work, and how to like properly maneuver with the knife and actually do well, you would excel because you would get so many points from it, right? Um, and then you could turn that, like you said, you could turn that into more upgrades and things like that from the shops.
I was like, my community gives me so much shit about that, and I told them, I was like, look, and I was like, listen, I beat Resident Evil 4 remake a while back. I was like, listen, I was like, with the way that they added the new knife system, I love it. I was like, look, y'all want me to do a challenge run? I was like, let me finish upgrading all the weapons, and I was like, and I'll do a handgun and knives only. I was like, but I'm gonna use the upgraded handguns that have like the infinite ammo, because that, or at least the unbreakable knives. I was like, because that's ridiculous having to go through that many. I was like, well, I'll do that for y'all. I was like, but y'all gonna let me cheat the game a little bit. I was like, but I'm still gonna hate myself because I'm just like all handguns and nothing but knife.
Yeah, and to be fair too, just like I don't want to give anybody the wrong impression. Like, it's not like the game is going to require you to play like that, right? Like, you'll be able to play the game basically however you feel, and you should be able to succeed, right? Like, you'll be fine. But we wanted to have a feature like this system so that there's basically more like possibilities, right? Like, you could play through the game so many different times. Like, I want to do a knife only run. I want to do a pistols only run. I want to do a run where I just get the infinite rocket launchers, blow everybody to bits, right? Like, it basically it kind of like gets as much out of it as we can, right? So that way, when it comes out, you guys have like so many different ways to play the game. That was like the basis behind why, or one of the bases rather, why we wanted to have that system.
And you know what? I love that. I love seeing that. That's kind of the inspiration of what y'all want to do here, is being able to
Yeah,
kind of have that variety in how you play. However you want to approach the game, it's accessible to you. It's not going to force you to
exactly.
play one specific way.
Yeah, exactly. And I also wanted to say too, because you're asked like it was a chat, it was a question about what are we excited about. One thing I'm personally excited for, not only the genome system obviously, but also the branching path system. We've teased about that a lot on Twitter. There's going to be points in the game where you actually can make a choice about where you want to go, and Dino Crisis actually does this as well. Whether if anyone's played that in chat, or even you, Bloody, like there's a point where you get to the game where it's like, do you want to do what this person wants to do, or do you want to do what this person wants to do? And it actually changes what happens, right, in the story. And
Mm-hmm.
we're experimenting with things like that, and we want to have things like that where you play through one, you do route A, play through two, you do route B, and that you know right there, that's already basically like two playthroughs you could possibly do, right? So it's like this web of this
Oh,
triple effect of like replay value.
yep. And that
That's
kind
just
of
going to
like
really make it. Yeah.
and it adds a lot of depth, because the fact is it's like, hey, if there's like four branching ways and each one adds something different, well, it's like, well, you have A and B at the start, you have C and D later on, then E and F and stuff like that. Well, it's like,
Yeah.
well, if you go to A, well, now it's gonna jump you over to E and F. So if you went B, you
Exactly.
would see C and D, but you wouldn't see E and F. So it kind of goes around how it all kind of ties into, or if it like loops back around, right? Well, now different
Yeah.
set stories going to happen here because you're coming at a later time compared to if you went down the other route. I really like that because it helps to change the story in
Mhm.
minor but also very big ways.
Yeah, it's like Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, right? If you go to like, I don't remember exactly what the case for it is, but it's like there's that like news station you go to,
Mm-hmm.
and like Nemesis can either show up there or he can show up at the restaurant, and it just depends on which one you go to first, right? And that kind of like little minor change is really cool. It's really refreshing, and
And
it
it,
just increases the replay value basically for
Yeah,
free.
and
So
you think that especially at some of those fights, it's just like, well, if I do this, like you mentioned the restaurant, right? You can either escape through the
Yeah.
hatch with Carlos, or you can stay and fight Nemesis, and then that leads you up to the fight if you go up into the tower here, where again you can
Yeah.
either fight him there, or
exactly.
there's you can escape. But if you don't defeat him there, he's going to show up in the next area and stuff like that. So
Exactly.
it all kind of plays out together on the kind of encounters or the way that the story's going to play and kind of hinder you in the next area.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the cool thing is, you ever played Resident Evil Survivor?
Yes.
Okay, you know how it's kind of a meme game? Like, it is a good game, but it's also, like, a little bit not as
Mm.
good as the rest of the Resident Evil games.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that was actually kind of what inspired us a little bit for the branching path system. Like, unironically, Survivor was a bit of an inspiration because that has some really cool branching paths, like full-on areas, and that's what we're doing as well. Like, when we say branching paths, we mean like, um, if you go to the hospital versus the police station, that is like two. What is it, like 2 hours, Nathan? 2 hours of content, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
And the police station versus the hospital, the police station has its own enemies, unique enemies, and its own unique boss. And the hospital has its own unique enemies and unique boss. So it's not just like, oh, you get the same experience but different skin. Like, it's literally like a
Two
whole different
different.
section of the game. Yeah.
And you know what? That is amazing. I was like, that really kind of goes to show the depth and kind of planning y'all went into this. It's just like we're not just gonna make the same enemies, just different skins, different areas. No, it's like you
Yeah.
go here, they're gonna be the kind of enemies that you would expect that are mutated that you would find in a hospital compared to if you find enemies that are
Exactly.
mutated in a police station. I was like, different areas, different adaptability, how they're gonna quote unquote mutate, right? I was like, I love that. I was like, so it really makes it feel unique.
I think actually the GIF I posted on Twitter of she was getting her face melted by something. That's the boss of the hospital, and I've showed the other boss of the police station earlier. I don't know how much is spoilers. I guess it is a spoiler, but